Listen to how people learned that all living things are made up of cells. In the 17th century, there was a scientist named Robert Hooke in England. Very likely in his childhood, he loved throwing different objects into the water to see which sank and which floated. Because being an adult, he was puzzled by why stones sank quickly, wood floated, and cork barely submerged, almost like it was a balloon. He examined pieces of cork from all angles but couldn't find an explanation. One day, in 1665, he decided that if he couldn't see something from the outside, he needed to look inside. He built a microscope. Back then, you couldn't just buy one at a store. There were only a few in the world. He cut a thin, almost transparent slice of cork, placed it under the microscope, and looked inside. What he saw was something no one had seen before, and it needed a name. Hooke thought, these tiny things look like little cells for monks. So he called them cells, from the Latin cella, small room. This is how, in 1665, Robert Hooke became the first person to see and draw cells. Hooke was lucky. If he had examined a duck, which also floats well, he wouldn't have seen cells. The contents and membranes of cells are thin and transparent, making them hard to see. However, cork cells have thick cell walls, which are easy to see under a microscope. But Hooke didn't understand the purpose of cells. Other scientists figured this out step by step. For example, Antony van Leeuwenhoek also made his own microscope, and it was more powerful. Robert Hooke's microscope was magnified 50 times, but Leeuwenhoek's up to 300 times. Therefore, in 1676, Leeuwenhoek saw something new that no one had seen before. He took a sample from his mouth, placed it under the microscope, and discovered entire separate creatures that consisted of just one cell. Leeuwenhoek himself called his discovery animalcules, little animals. However, his drawings were honest and accurate enough that we can be sure he saw bacteria. In 1827, Carl Ernst von Baer discovered the egg cell in mammals, clarifying that multicellular mammals, including humans, start their development from a single cell, the egg cell. One day, Robert Brown was examining an orchid flower under a microscope. He wasn't interested in cell theory. He simply wanted to study orchid reproduction. However, being observant, he noticed an opaque spot in the center of the cell, which he sometimes called the nucleus and sometimes the areola. In 1831, he published a scientific paper where he described this nucleus and mentioned that he had seen it not only in orchids but also in some other plants. That not only some, but all plants consist of cells and contain a nucleus was proven by Matthias Schleiden. In 1838, he roughly understood the purpose of the nucleus, thinking it was the cell's organizer. He believed that a granular substance condensed into a nucleolus, around which the nucleus formed, and around the nucleus, the cell. He thought the nucleus could disappear during cell formation. He also believed cells could form from the protoplasm of other cells, like nested dolls. Now, we already know that the nucleus never completely disappears from the cells. It is just sometimes difficult to see under a microscope, or the nuclear membrane is destroyed during division. The nucleolus is necessary for the formation of ribosomes. In 1839, Theodor Schwann published a scientific work explaining that not only plants, but also animals and all living beings are made of cells, and that plant and animal cells share common structures. He identified the main difference between living and non-living things. The cell is the elementary structural unit of all living organisms. Everything made of cells is alive. Everything else is not. But even he thought cells could arise from protoplasm inside other cells. Rudolf Virchow ended this misconception in 1858. He stated the fundamental principle of cell theory, omnia cellula e cellulae, meaning A cell can only arise from a pre-existing cell. Combining the work of these and many other scientists, we get the cell theory, which states all living organisms are composed of one or more cells. A cell is the basic structural and functional unit of living organisms. All cells arise from pre-existing cells. That's how it usually goes in science, one step to the side and two steps forward, and it was established that cells are the basic unit of life.